Well, hello again, everyone. Happy holidays to you. Welcome to Peak Policy. I'm Chris Cargill, the president of Mountain States Policy Center, and we're really glad to have you with us today. And thanks for joining us a couple of minutes after when we said we'd be on. Look, Congress is a mysterious place. It works in a lot of different ways at a lot of different times, and you kind of just have to go with the flow. So we're really glad that we're going to be able to talk with Congressman Russ Fulcher of Idaho here in just a couple of minutes. Just a reminder for everyone. First of all, thank you for everyone who attended our Idaho poll release at the Grove Hotel last week. It was a great event. If you missed the Idaho poll, you can go to our website, mountainstatespolicy.org, to see all the polling results and a lot of interesting data and statistics from that poll that I think that you'll be fascinated by. Also, just another quick reminder that the first day of the legislative session in Idaho, January 6th, we will have former Arizona Governor Doug Ducey with us to talk about education choice. So that is at the Idaho State Capitol right before the session kicks off at noon with the governor's State of the State address. Governor Doug Ducey will be with us at 10 a.m. in the Lincoln Auditorium to talk about education choice. We're really glad to have on the program today, as I mentioned, Congressman Russ Fulcher of Idaho's 1st Congressional District. Congressman, thanks very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Chris, thank you for letting me come on today. It's just a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, I know you've had a busy morning and you guys have been voting and there's a lot going on and you've got the budget that you're trying to figure out hopefully sometime this week. But tell us what's happening in Congress right now as we get ready to end this Congress and start the next Congress.
Well, we're in a lame duck session, as you know. We've got some changing of the guard coming up in January. That can't happen soon enough, in my opinion. And we're going through a kind of an ugly but not unanticipated situation with what's called a continuing resolution for spending. And so that's kind of sucking all the oxygen out of the room right now. And so far, it looks like Washington, D.C. is going to act again, kind of like Washington, D.C. traditionally has with some pretty crazy end of the year spending and a process that's quite frankly not all that transparent. So, but again, we got some hope coming. We've got a changing of the guard, and hopefully with that change, we'll have some better processes moving forward next year.
Now, I saw one report this morning that the spending bill that's being worked on is some 1,000 pages at least. Is that right?
Well, I don't know for sure because I haven't seen it yet, and that's another problem. But it's reportedly going to be about 1,400 pages and have everything in it from the continuing resolution for traditional spending, plus a whole bunch of other things. It's likely to have disaster relief stuff in there, and it's going to have some medical reform stuff. It's going to have my understanding is a kind of an extension of the Farm Bill. It's the type of thing where, to be honest, Chris, we really should be voting on separately. These should be going through the traditional committee process. But because of everything going on, the lame duck session and the scenario where the Republicans still just have one body on the legislative ledger, it's all going through in what's called a suspension process. The committee's being bypassed. There's no amendments. It's just coming through as a great big stack of paper. So that's, in my view, that's not how is best to govern. Yeah. But that's what we're facing right now.
And I guess basically, and it's appropriate for this time of year, it's a Christmas tree, it sounds like.
It is. I think it's a Christmas tree with a whole bunch of packages in there. The only problem is that it's all on the credit card, and we don't have the money to pay for it, which is, honestly, I think that's a big part of the reason why the American people said, you know what, it's time for a change, and they're right. And so that's where we are.
All right. So looking ahead to the next Congress then, which starts January 3rd, what's priority number one for that Congress? As you mentioned, the Republicans will have complete control of both the House and the Senate, make it a little bit easier to get things passed. But what's the number one priority you think for Congress? And then what's your number one priority?
Chris, I got to tell you, on the federal level, we got to say border. We have had an open border for some 4 years now. And if you and I were having a conversation in 50 years, and I won't be, but maybe you will.
I don't know. We'll see about that.
We'll see. But I think the history will reflect, looking back on this time, that open border was probably the worst policy of the current administration. And quite frankly, I think it will be considered the worst failure of Congress because we've not been able to override it. What I mean by that is, Chris, we have no idea who is in this country right now. We've got somewhere between 10 and 20 million people have not been vetted, mostly single males. And there's nothing wrong with that. But my point is that it's not the typical refugee population. And so the Homeland Security threats that are coming as a result of that, we know about the drug cartels and all of that. Idaho has had at least 197 deaths in illegal fentanyl deaths. That's just Idaho. And all the sex trafficking and whatnot. We've got to secure the border, and that's got to be priority number one, I think. Right on the heels of that is we got to put ourselves back into a domestic energy program, growing our domestic energy resources. That has, as you know, not just implications at home where you're providing your own energy, but that gives you leverage internationally. If you're an energy exporter, then that means our friends, at least some of them, are buying energy from us and not from our enemies. And that has a big impact on your foreign policy. So energy and jumpstarting that has got to be right on the heels of the border. Then you've got the budget process, putting the spending under control, just the reverse of what I was talking about with the CR coming. And we've got a couple of very brilliant guys that the new president's going to be tapping, and that's Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, with trying to find ways to make things more efficient. And God bless them. We need them. And that's going to be a real important one. The list goes on. The foreign wars. I mean, we've got to take a more aggressive role in the current situation with foreign wars. Full plate for the new Congress coming in.
One of your, I want to talk about energy as well in just a second, but one of the first votes that you and your colleagues are going to take is going to be who's going to be Speaker. And I assume, from what I'm hearing, it's going to be Speaker Johnson continuing. But what do you have any insight on that for our audience?
I think it will be Speaker Johnson, but it's not going to be just an automatic thing. And part of the reason of that, there's a lot of people upset with this spending package that is going to take us through the lame duck into March, and how that was processed. And so I think that there's probably going to be a challenge. It will eventually work out, I think, where Speaker Johnson returns. And but it's going to be the sausage making that Congress is so well known for in the process. But that's coming up in January.
Lava Ridge, that's going to be obviously back on the agenda, at least from our point of view. And I think for your point of view, and then Senators Crapo and Risch as well. Is there anything we can do as a state to end up putting a halt on that coming up in the next Congress?
Well, I think we can here. I don't want to sound too optimistic, but we were relatively sure this administration was going to move forward with a yes recommendation to do it, even though basically all the local stakeholders, or pretty much all of them, have said no. And but the key to that is the appropriations. Chris, wind projects don't operate on their own merit. There's simply not a workable model. It's so incredibly expensive to operate them that they can't function without subsidies or tax credits or some mix thereof. And if we stop the appropriation for that, and that's the intent, then I don't think that it moves forward. So that is going to be in Congress's hands with the appropriations. We should, I hesitate when I say that, but we should be able to stop it by not appropriating the subsidies. And so, yes, they technically would have a green light to proceed, but without taxpayer help, it just fiscally doesn't make sense. So this is not over yet. And it shouldn't be. In my opinion, it's a very bad program. Idahoans don't want it. Even if we did get that put in place, it'd be very expensive, and the power would be exported primarily, my understanding is, to Southern California. So bad deal for Idaho, but I think we have a pathway to stop it.
One other question had for you on next Congress, and that is education choice. Obviously, it's going to be something that the legislature is going to be considering. And then we've seen proposals on both sides of the Capitol in D.C. to try to create some sort of federal education choice policy. And that kind of all wraps into this discussion about whether we should get rid of the Department of Education as well. Because of what it does or doesn't do. So what's your feeling on that from your point of view, from where you sit, about what the Congress can do and then what the legislature back home should do as well?
Well, first of all, the legislature is exactly the place where these discussions need to be being made, not in Washington, D.C. As you know, there is no constitutional backing for a federal education department. And so I have, at least in my years in Washington, I have never seen as much inertia for pulling the plug on the federal Department of Education as now. I actually personally spoke to the speaker about it, and he said that he was in favor of just pulling the plug on the funding for it entirely, which, in essence, that would atrophy. But this is an area where the states truly have the authority and should be making the policy decisions. It's not out of Washington, D.C. When we do things in Washington, it tends to be a big swath approach that everyone has to adhere to the same standards. And as we all know, things in Idaho are different than New York. It's different than Connecticut or California or Oregon. I mean, these decisions belong local. And I think that at least during this administration, there's going to be a lot of leeway appropriately steered toward the states to allow that to happen. So having been a former member of the state legislature on education for 10 years, on the education committee for 10 years, that ought to be considered as very positive news. And I did see the results of your poll on the choice. I agree with that. This is a strong position, and it's not just in Idaho. You saw the election results for a governor in Virginia swing on this issue, on education choice and parental involvement. And so this is a huge issue. It belongs in the hands of the states, and I think that's exactly where this next federal administration is going to push it.
We're talking with Congressman Russ Fulcher of Idaho, great friend of MSPC, great friend of Idaho as well, of course. Congressman, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this upcoming deadline that we're facing here in the next year to try to renew the Trump tax cuts, as they're known, and the Trump tax policy. Is that going to be, along with the border that you mentioned earlier, is that going to be one of the top priorities that you all have in the first 100 days or so?
It is, and I think it's going to happen. We've got the support, I believe, to make that happen, not just on the conservative side of the Republican Party, but also the moderates as well. And the result, Chris, is, as you're probably aware, is if we don't do that, that will equate to the largest single tax increase that we have ever had, because those. I'm going from memory here, but I think that would put an incremental burden in excess of $1 trillion on business without doing this, and that's exactly what we don't want to do. If you allow not just the businesses but individuals to keep more of what they earn, they're going to take that, they're going to reinvest it, they're going to spend it, they're going to put it back in the economy in the most appropriate fashion. And that's what we want. We want to encourage production. We want to encourage business. We want to encourage growth. And you do that not by stripping away the revenues that the individuals and businesses make and then redeploying that or redistributing that through government channels. You do that by leaving that in the hands of the businesses and the hands of the people. And I think that that's generally going to be the direction of this administration.
In our remaining moments with Idaho Congressman Russ Fulcher here, Congressman, I know the House doesn't have much to do with the nominations of the president or the cabinet selections, but just give us your overall impression of all the nominations that the president has made and what your advice would be to your Senate brothers and sisters.
We're actually interacting a lot over that. This is a big deal. And if you followed the appointees and the people that have been identified by President Trump coming in, this is not your typical status quo list of nominees. There is a lot of I won't say surprises, but there's a lot of people in there that are coming in from a vantage point where they've got leverage, where they've got a good expertise, but they've also got a attitude which is not the status quo. And so I think they're going to be heavily supported. May not get them all, but for example, I know that Pete Hegseth is one of those that have been getting a lot of scrutiny. I personally met with Pete. I know him casually, not really well, and had a chance to talk with him. And I think that he will probably get ongoing scrutiny. But you know what? This president deserves to have his nominees reviewed and reviewed fairly. And let the process take its course. If it's deemed by the Senate that there's just someone that's just simply not acceptable for some reason or another, you know what? There's going to be somebody else right behind them that is going to be a good candidate as well. So I know a number of them. Mike Waltz I serve with, of course. Elise Stefanik I serve with. These are two very good people, two very qualified people, going to do very well. Marco Rubio I serve with him. He's going to be a great Secretary of State. John Ratcliffe, the same thing. And you know what, Chris, I think the thing to take away from this is not business as usual. And that's really refreshing for those of us who've we have a tendency to get caught up in that business as usual mindset when we're back here. And this is a real breath of fresh air. And I got to tell you, I'm more excited about this coming year and about this administration than any other time. This will be starting the 7th year for me. So I haven't been here for a long, long time, but I certainly follow it. Was in the state legislature before that. I'm excited. And you know what? The environment here is encouraging. It's almost like when November 5th happened, this dark cloud kind of lifted up. And it's not just the Republicans. My Democrat friends would never admit it, but I think they've got a feeling of relief as well. And I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but it's just an attitude. And we need that right now. I'm excited about it. We're going to have a good year. We're going to have a good session.
Well, we will be watching, of course, as the 119th Congress gets underway on January 3rd. Congressman, thanks very much for being with us. We really appreciate it. We will see you either in DC or back home, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Chris, thank you. And thank you for what you do. You're appreciated.
Thank you very much. Congressman Russ Fulcher, always glad to have him on Peak Policy. And just another quick reminder about some of the events that we have coming up here at Mountain States Policy Center. First of all, if you didn't get a copy of the Mountain States Policy Manual, jump online, go to Amazon. Makes a great stocking stuffer, by the way. All of our research recommendations all in one place. You can also read the digital version on mountainstatespolicy.org. And don't forget our upcoming spring dinner on April 11th in Coeur d'Alene with Judge Janine Pirro. You can get your tickets right now, mountainstatespolicy.org, mountainstatespolicy.org, to get your tickets to see Judge Janine on Friday, April 11th in Coeur d'Alene. Should be a great night with the judge and hopefully a few other special guests as well. Thanks for being with us. We will see you next time here on Peak Policy.
Thanks for watching Mountain States Policy Center. To stay up to date on the work of MSPC, visit mountainstatespolicy.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Mountain States Policy Center. Free markets first.